John, thank you so much for finding the time. Finally, right?
Yeah, yeah, happy to be here.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. I know you've been doing a lot of podcasts, you've been doing a lot of recordings, rightfully so, because I know the book, you said, I should say your second book, but this current book has just become public, has just become available. And I have so many questions. I don't even really know where to start, but I will start. Based on what I know, and you can kind of take it the way you want to explain this, but based on what I know, based on what people will see in the book, this book is really about your own process. The book is really about you discovering who you are, and the question is really how you did that and how you are willing to help others go through the same process. What is the book about, if you had to kind of summarize it, if you had to kind of put it in your own words?
Well, I created a title that I hoped would be a clue. It would give some understanding of the nature of the work. So the title of the book is "Be the Dawn in the Darkness," and the subtitle is "The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be." And so it should provide some clues. Like I've had some really long dark nights in my lifetime, and I can't tell you how many times I didn't sleep and I just waited for sunrise. I would wait for the first hint of dawn, and when my feet hit the ground, I was moving, and that really explained the title.
Right.
And I've had some experiences with some mentors in my life that shared that with me initially when I was a young boy. And so the book is about a very special matriarch, a woman in our family, that she was an elder, and how much influence she had over me as a young boy, and just the messages that she gave me and the provisioning that she gave me for my hero's journey that would lie ahead. She knew I was in trouble. She knew I was in a very abusive relationship with my father in our home life,
Right.
and so there's more to the story, but it's about the messengers, the mentors that help shape your life, and how that carries you forward through adversity and difficulty and trauma.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. And the question is always to have that mentor, to have that positive influence, right? And I think some people go through their lives and they really don't have that until some people never get it, but I think some people don't discover that influence until later in life. And I think it kind of corrects their whole path. And it's interesting that I think in some ways books like this one, books like yours, can serve in a way as that type of a mentor, even though it's not a person, it is a book. But I think what makes this book interesting is that you are talking about your own journey, you're talking about your own life. As you mentioned, the matriarch is actually, from what I read, is your grandmother. Is
Oh,
that
it's my
correct?
great aunt, my great aunt.
Right. And so my question is, that being a close person to you, if she's the closest person, you obviously had a connection. You had a level of trust. She knew you. In other words, as you said, she looked deeply into you, and she kind of saw that potential. And I think a lot of times people don't have that, someone that believes in them, right? That one special person that can look into them and help them kind of find that light. And you said it in your title, as you said, basically, be your own, be the dawn. So ultimately, it's just a matter of waking up sometimes, right? It's a matter of discovering that direction. How is it that people are able to? I'm kind of curious. This book, I believe, and then I think you will agree, this book is really helpful to a lot of people. Obviously, specifically those that find themselves, in a difficult spot, whatever it may be. And obviously, we've talked about veterans, we've talked about people with PTSD and other mental health troubles. But there's a lot of people, obviously, that will fall into those categories. How do you think, in your own words, how do you think this book will be helpful for such people to get familiar with?
Well, anybody who's had adversity, anybody who's experienced trauma, which are most people I've ever met, with very few exceptions, you know, if you didn't have a matriarch or a patriarch, a mentor, a magical helper, if you know, when you were young, hopefully this book will serve as some messages, you know, that will be helpful. Because what I really needed to do was to realize that you know, bad things happen to me. There's nothing wrong with me. Growing up, I was convinced there must be something wrong with me, because why else would these terrible things happen with my father? In my neighborhood growing up, it was very violent, a lot of gangs, a lot of violence, just constantly. And then I went into the Marine Corps,
Right.
and you know, more violence, you know, a lot of drug abuse, some drug abuse, but really mostly just alcohol abuse. I
Right.
was never an alcoholic, but I drank to numb out, and I smoked a lot of pot to numb out because I didn't like myself. I didn't want to be present. It was too painful.
Right.
And so, you know, the main message is that that doesn't really represent who you are, because aside from maybe some genetic anomalies, you know, we come into this world a clean hard drive,
Right.
and then everything happens to us, right? But the bad things that are happening to us don't represent who we actually are, represent that bad things happen to us. So I had to turn the processing around in my mind to move away from there must be something wrong with me. And, you know, I can tell you a couple of things. You know, I was provisioned early on that I would do extraordinary things with my life by my Aunt Glad. And I say this a lot, but I believed her because she said it. When you're a young, impressionable child, when somebody is amazing in your life and they're listening to you and asking you how you're doing, and then they're telling you that you have courage within you and that you have to find something greater than your fear, and they're provisioning you for this journey ahead, you know, I have somehow I developed a level of optimism that I would get through what I was getting through. And it was some pretty violent near-death experiences, some,
I'm sure.
yeah. And so my main thing is that I was able to look at myself differently, because I did have some bad experiences, but it didn't represent who I really am deep down. And it took me a long time to believe that, because self-worth and self-esteem, you just don't typically skip rungs on the ladder. I look at it like a ratchet, click, click, click,
Mhm.
click, 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 little by little, click, click, click. And it just had to grow over and on and on and on top of itself. And the more, for me, I found that personal development was my path to recovery, because I was in the Marine Corps. I had a rage problem. I didn't want to go seek help. You don't ask for help. You're told you should ask for help, but in essence, it's also still seen as a stigma
Of
that
course.
you're weak, you know, that you can't handle it, you know. And so we're just trained not to ask for help, and it works against you. But I found personal development audiobooks for me were really, really helpful. So I could lose myself in personal development, transformational development, and I could learn about who I was becoming. That, I would say that's the most important thing, is focusing on who you're becoming, not necessarily where you've been, because the past, you know, it's happened, it's
The
done.
past is just the past. But you think about what you just said, and it just really resonates with so many people. I think it just takes one person that believes in you, and it totally counters maybe 100 people that have been negative to you. But then what I also heard and what I also read is that in your work, that it is a process, as you just said. In other words, it's not just a quick from start to finish. It's something you got to go through, something you got to really experience. But more than that, I think it's just a matter, it sums up as learning to control yourself, learning to control your own emotions, your own triggers, your own, because all of us will, like you just said, all of us have issues, all of us have certain things we've been through, certain, let's call it past. In other words, we all come from somewhere. Think about where you've come from. It's unbelievable, because you said you had a rage problem. I look at you now, you know, it's amazing to see that, you know, where you've come, and you're willing to kind of tell other people what that journey was all about. But the same problem persists today. Think about stigma. You mentioned the issue of stigma. The same stigma exists today. Not only, I can only imagine what it is like in the Marine Corps, because I obviously have not been there, but I think it exists generally in our society today, because when people want to seek help, be it for alcohol dependence, be it for especially mental health issues, which is I'm so passionate about trying to get people to acknowledge it, because the first way of, you know, first step to dealing with something is acknowledging it and saying, I do have this issue, and I want to embark on a journey of self-discovery. John, how can people really begin this process of controlling their own emotions and triggers in your own experience? And think about what you've been through in your life, right?
Well, in my first book, it's called Transitioning Veterans, How We Get in Our Own Way and What to Do About It.
Right.
I think the easiest way is just to describe a process that I developed that really, really helped me. And then when I shared it with others, it had a similar effect. And so I wrote and recorded and narrated an audiobook, this audiobook. And really what it was about is how to notice you're being triggered and how to self-regulate.
Okay.
Because if anybody who's had trauma gets triggered,
right,
and you can label the fear or the concern that comes up when instant we're triggered, we go into an episode, right? And sometimes it can last for hours or even days, especially if we start medicating with alcohol, or we start we just go into a traumatized, you know, episode. So the first thing I discovered was to recognize that I'm triggered, because when I was able to notice it and say to myself, I'm triggered, internally whispering it to myself, or if I'm with my wife, I mean, hey, I'm triggered. It just lets her know that I'm okay. You don't have to do anything for me. I'm responsible for me, but I need a moment, right? And I can self-regulate, and I do. So noticing that you're triggered, because when we're triggered into an episode where it's very concerning, and we're going into a traumatic like flashback, it's hard to control. It's like you're like you pop your head into the episode and you're reliving a traumatic experience or a recollection of an experience as if it's happening right now. And what I found was, if I could pop my head out of it and I could observe it, I dissociated from it. And there was a level of relief where I could observe how terrible it was without having so much of the somatic body sensations. And so I imagine I'm sitting in a movie theater, like watching the traumatic episode on the screen. And I learned this process decades ago, but if that didn't do it, I would imagine I'm in the theater room, the projector room, watching myself watch the episode up on the screen. I just needed to get away from being in the episode. So first thing is recognize that you're triggered.
Right.
And that which you were observing, you are no longer. So I learned how to step back and get some space.
Right.
So that was number one, is recognize very quickly. And sometimes it would take me hours to recognize that 3 hours ago, this guy cut me off and gave me the bird, and now I'm still upset about something, you know. But I learned I learned to collapse the time frame to where it'd be nanoseconds. I noticed the sensations in my throat and my chest getting tense. That's a clue that I'm really triggered.
Correct.
So bottom line,
you want to recognize your own physical symptoms, right? In other words, it's all always going to manifest itself in some physical way, and everyone has that, as you just said. We'll react. Some people actually suppress that, but I think it's better to recognize your own symptoms, acknowledge it, maybe possibly even verbally, say it out loud to your, as you said, to your wife or to your significant person in your life, and just say, hey, I have this, I have to deal with this, I don't want to suppress it, because suppressing, I think, is a whole different issue where people will eventually end up dealing with that. Is this kind of like similar to mindfulness, where you want to, as you say, you want to kind of like find out where you are and then take a step back from, being a part of the scene, and kind of like be to be an observer of what's going on, and then you get into control of your own actions.
It's a step, as well as being mindful, dropping into some different emotion. First thing is recognize that you're recognizing, I'm triggered right now. Next thing is recognize that you're not breathing. Like when I get triggered, I used to get triggered, I would be talking to you right now, and it's panoramic, it's full color, relaxed. But when I got triggered, it would instantly zoom into black and white. Right. And I would just, all my senses would just come right down to what's right in front of me. And it was very hard to shift out of that. But when I recognized that I was triggered, I finally started noticing I'm not breathing. I'm hyper aware. I'm ruminating on what's going on right here. And then it told me, take a deep breath.
Right.
And once I got some oxygen, I started noticing that the panoramic vision comes back, right? Like I can feel myself relaxing. So I started using a square breathing process called tactical breathing or square breathing, where you breathe in and out just through your nose very calmly. And you breathe in for 5, you hold for 5, you breathe out for 5.
Right.
And you hold for 5. You breathe in, and you just practice this several times, and you can feel your heart rate lowering and regulating. So it's a 3-step process, and those are the first 2. Recognize that you're triggered, oxygenate. Oxygen is the antidote for anxiety.
Correct.
And then 3 is to shift the focus of your attention. So in the audiobook, I actually have another person doing the dual narration of the person who's triggered, that critical mind that's always hijacking moments. I play the rational, reasonable mind, like I'm talking to you right now. And this other character who's a veteran, his name is Yonel. He's the one who's flipping out and getting triggered and yelling in the back of my head. And so in this case, I asked this critical mind, Yonel, can you remember the first time that you were with your little baby girl? Because I know he has some children. And were you there when she was born? Yes. Do you remember when the first time happened, when she was staring up at you and you were staring back at her and you recognized each other? He's like, oh yeah, that was a moment. Right. And he went from being this triggered, irritable veteran to, oh, that's a moment. So in an instant, you can change your whole physiology, your whole way of being. Sure. By focusing on a moment like that. So you recognize, you breathe, and then you shift. And those 3 steps, for me, it changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. Because sure. I haven't had I've only had a few moments like those moments of awe, like I just would like to spend more time there. But whenever I shift my focus of attention, I instantly start relaxing.
Right. And I think that let's call it a happy thoughts or happy place or whatever. In other words, the question is always to jump away from the current, because as you described it, people in those difficult triggered situations, they instantly react, and they, like you said, they focus on the problem instead of actually taking a step back and saying, let me take a moment to analyze how serious is really. In other words, is there another world outside of this current minute, outside of this current situation? Can I go back and that's a perfect way to summarize. You told, in that case, you told the critical mind to go back to likely the happiest moment of his life, birth of the daughter, or the first time they connected
right.
their gaze. And that happy moment is probably different for everyone, but everyone has that. Everyone has that particular moment. I recall in one movie, someone told um, told his friend to think about his mother, who was no longer living, but he quickly thought about it. He remembered some of the positive moments. He quickly forgot about all the stressful thoughts that he had at the moment. So there are ways to deal with anxiety. There are ways to overcome those momentary explosions because, you know, and then what I wanted to ask you, because besides being an author, as I say, you really are writing from your own life experiences. You are a veteran. So when you tell people that this book, the current book, and both your books actually are helpful to veterans, I think you know what you're talking about from that perspective. Because veterans, I think, deal with PTSD specifically in a very, very different, meaningful way. Because some people may have stress, some people may have reactions. Veterans, to me, are special because they actually have a good reason for that PTSD. In other words, that PTSD is not necessarily something they're born with, but that's something they kind of acquire because of that um, dangerous periods of their life. And I don't think people truly completely understand what they go through. I can only imagine your experiences in the Marine Corps, but do you think the fact that you were I think based on what I was reading, it kind of like, talking to Glad, who is your great aunt, was somewhat of a preparation for your beginning of your self-discovery. Because as you kind of went through those difficult moments later on, you could remember, you could think back to the things that she told you. In other words, this process of self-discovery, is it dependent upon the experiences that people go through, or is it something that people should really undertake in preparation, so to speak? In other words, it's something that everyone should really go for.
Well, I mean, if there was a way to inoculate you from trauma, that would be awesome.
Right.
Um, like give you a vaccination so you could be more prepared for it. That would be great. And if there was a way, I would say, again, personal development, transformational development, Viktor Frankl's work, just looking at adversity. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
I was the son of a Marine Corps Korean War combat veteran who also went to Vietnam and the Air Force as a reconnaissance photographer. And he got shot down with his pilot. So he was a very violent, traumatized, alcoholic parent,
Right.
And I was in the Army briefly. Then I was in the Marine Corps for a short period of time. And my son, he did 2 tours in Afghanistan, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and he came back, and he was changed. He was very, very different, and 2 sides of a coin. It was very nice, very gentle, very smiling, contagious, and then there was this extremely violent, war fighter,
But
who
you can understand that. In other words,
I
of all
I
people, you can understand it.
Yeah, well, I saw the wrecking ball growing up, and then he got killed after he got back from Afghanistan on a high-speed motorcycle accident when he was needing to get his adrenaline rush, and so I mentioned Viktor Frankl because he went through the concentration camps and had his family taken away and killed, and then when they stripped him naked and told him to give them his wedding ring, he was a mental health professional. I think he was a psychiatrist,
I believe so. Yes.
and he was processing everything going on from so many different perspectives. He realized in that moment that the only thing he had control of was how he responded to his captors.
Right.
And so he gave them the ring, but he didn't give him his sense of self. He didn't give them his sense of self. And he was able to use this innate curiosity of, why am I going through this? For the sake of why am I going through this? What purpose is this serving in my life for me to have to go through this? And then, so he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he kept the manuscript sewn into his jacket, and then when he gets out of there, he writes Man's Search for Meaning, and he develops a logotherapy, which is meaning and purpose therapy. And that methodology is adopted worldwide by the U.S. military for recovery for veterans in the vet centers around the country, where they get circles of men and women together that served in the exact same conflict, and they search for meaning and purpose of why they survived and
Right.
what are they here to do. So yeah, I think if there was a way to provision yourself for the journey ahead, uh, look into like meaning and purpose. It's up to us to find the meaning and the purpose for what we've experienced, no matter how bad it is.
Absolutely. And you talk about bad, listen, for Viktor Frankl, he was really, I guess, at the lowest circle of hell right there. And it takes a strong person, but I think, um, you know, that's such, these are such powerful words when you talk about finding the meaning. Why am I going through this? But what is my purpose ultimately? What is my ultimate purpose besides what these people are doing to me? It's really how you react to the situation. But I think that the most effective idea that he planted and that you talk about in your work is the fact that every one of us has some sort of a meaning. It's just sometimes it's just not clear. It's not clear. You may need someone to point it out to you, or you may need to undertake your own journey of self-discovery and kind of like find out what's going on. But the question is always to have that search, because sometimes what I've seen in my work and also what I've read, and what I see in a lot of veterans is that they start to believe that there is no further purpose, that there is nothing beyond the current difficulty. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a question of saying, okay, look, I can conquer myself, right? I can be more than I am today. And that's why when you talk about, you know, discovering who you really are, right? To reach your own potential, who you're meant to be. I think in your book, and it started off from your great aunt, but ultimately it's discovering, chipping off the rough edges, let's call it, and find out who is the real ultimate person that I was meant to be. What do you think that means when you say meant to be? In other words, is there like the ultimate person that we are all meant to be, and we don't really know until we know? In other words, or we kind of create that person ourselves.
I mean, the thought of becoming our greatest potential, I mean, isn't that what everybody would really would want? Even if they don't know it, there's a vision that somehow things could be better.
Sure.
You
Sure.
know, life. Maria Nemeth wrote a book called Mastering Life's Energies. I highly recommend it. And she has one great question that I just constantly find myself using when I'm talking to people that are having difficulty. And it's would it be all right with you if your life got a little easier?
That's a good one, right?
And just the relief that people
I
are like,
like that.
yeah, it would be really
Sure.
nice, you
Right.
know. So I think the thing is that discovering who we were meant to be is, man, it is about being curious. And I was fortunate. I was fortunate to be when I was a young boy. My aunt Glad told me that, be careful. She said, pay attention to the people that you meet by chance, because they could most likely be the messengers that are here to teach you the most. So be curious. Like when you get a flat tire or you break down or whatever, you're probably going to bump into somebody. And I bumped into one of those somebodies when I was getting out of the Marine Corps, 2 weeks before I was getting out of the Marine Corps, at a USO in Okinawa, Japan. And I'm paying this conversation forward since then thousands of times. But I had like a 5 to 10 minute conversation with a person that I never saw again, and it changed the trajectory of my life.
That's
And
amazing.
maybe by us talking to you, maybe by us talking right now, maybe somebody can hear what I heard that
Absolutely.
interrupted my life, which, he was listening to myself and a bunch of Marines talk about what we're going to do when we get out of the Marines. And long story short, when I went up to the counter to get another beer, he said, hey, you understand you getting out in a couple of weeks. Can I give you some advice? And this guy, they call it a warrant officer. He's a special kind of officer. in the military, where they've been in the enlisted and they go back to college. They get out and go back to college and they come back in as an officer.
Right.
So you listen to warrant officers, and he said, you know, you're going to get out, and it's not going to take you more than a few days to realize that the world doesn't need another Marine who could parachute out of helicopters at night and carry big heavy packs. You know, they don't care about that. He said, you've changed, but the people you're going to go home to are exactly the same. You've changed because of your experiences. So instead of sitting here drinking beer and slapping each other on the backs, talking about what you're going to do when you get out of the Marines, I'd go to the closest bookstore. I'd go to the self-help section, not the psychology section.
Self-help.
And I would basically start looking at every book on the shelf, and I'd pick some out, and I'd pick 3 that really, really spoke to me. And I'm not going to tell you which books to get. And, you know, and he said to me, he quoted a guy named Eric Hoffer, who was a longshoreman back in like the 30s and 40s. He wrote a couple of great books. But Eric Hoffer's book, he said, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with the world that no longer exists. He said, you are beautifully equipped from being in the Marines to deal with the world that no longer exists, because you might always be a Marine, but you're no longer going to be in the Marines.
Right.
But don't be a hard-headed person. Be a learner. Don't be learned. So
Right.
I
Always
shook his
be learning.
hand. I shook his hand. We said goodbye. I never saw him again. But that was the most powerful conversation I've ever had, out of the blue, with somebody I never met.
Wow.
And so I went to the bookstore and I picked up, 3 books: The Magic of Thinking Big by Schwartz, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And that was a weird title for me, but I was so curious, and I realized after looking at the introduction that Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon who corrected people's imperfections and made them beautiful, but they still couldn't see it because of their self-concept.
Right. Right.
And that was who I was. I had this impeccable Marine Corps uniform, but I had a low self-worth, had a lot of rage. I knew how to look and walk and talk and be impeccable, but internally I was hurting. You know,
Why did he talk to you? What do you think? I mean, I know you don't know. Why do you?
because I think my Aunt Glad had a hand in it.
Well,
Because
that's kind of like what I'm thinking also, right?
Yeah, I can just keep going. Well, my company commander, Colonel Sweetser, he looked out for me. I was a hell-raising Marine. I wasn't a squared away Marine.
Right.
Okay. I was the guy who's always getting in trouble. Right. But he was another magical helper. I've got this just string of magical helpers along my path that just showed up, and I just paid attention. And so that's
and I think that's
paying
a question,
attention.
right? To pay attention, because I think everyone may have those and they may not focus and even pay attention to the positives, the things like that could literally, like you said, in 5 minutes can change their life. That's why I think your work and similar books are so valuable, because it might just take 5 minutes. Someone might just grab it and open one page somewhere in the middle, or listen to chapter 4 on the audio. It doesn't matter, randomly, and hear one thing or read one thing that could literally click something in their mind and open up a whole different channel of perception. And I think that's the true value, because I think it's a question of reading these materials, listening to the words that you share, because to me your words are your own words. It's not that something you research by interviewing people and talking to someone else somewhere. You're talking about your own life. You're talking about the legacy of what you and your son have contemplated and wanted to share with others and I think, I wish by some miracle you could, retroactively share these with your father. Because if you think about your father, and I know he was a, let's call it initially a negative influence in your life, but I wish, because you do know where he was coming from, what the pain that he had inside. And there are so many other fathers like that, and so many other people like that that wish they could break that generational, that chain of they just sometimes don't know any better, right? But just a matter of paying attention and focusing. And it's all about tools. Don't you think it's about, would you summarize these as almost like tools of dealing with yourself, of improving yourself, changing yourself, different techniques and tools that people should learn continuously?
Yeah. And I wrote this work in such a way that it's not a self-help. Let me tell you how to be successful with your life.
Right.
I'm sharing real raw experiences of uh, surviving and then learning and then growing and then encountering more and more difficulties, learning and growing, and just the relentless pursuit and never giving up. Because you grow and you get stronger. I'm not the same person I was even a year ago,
Right.
And so if you focus on it, and for me, a big part of my problems growing up was I didn't really fit in. A lot of violent, gang neighborhood where I grew up, and then going in the military, having some bad experiences. And then I, um, I was hanging out with the wrong people, and I was getting a lot of trouble all the time because I was hanging out with the wrong people doing the wrong things.
Right.
And, but I just wanted to fit in. And that for me, that was my personal issue, is that I had to realize that I need to recognize what I'm doing. And that came again through personal development from a guy named Jim Rohn,
Yep.
who wrote a book, a bunch of stuff, a bunch of books. He was Tony Robbins' first mentor. And so I just started burning up, take charge of your life and success strategies, these large volumes of audiobooks. And I had to pull over one time on the road because he said a couple of things that just got my attention. He said, "You must carefully examine the credentials of those who wish to enter the place in your mind where your thoughts are formed." And I had to pull over and write that down and
Well
commit it
said.
to memory, because I was hanging out with the wrong people. It's the first advice I ever got about how I was getting in my own way. And the second thing that I wrote down was the 3 types of association. This really changed very specifically, like, who I was hanging out with. He said the first thing is disassociation. If people are completely toxic and you know it, they're not good for you, why are you hanging out with them? Write them down, make a list, and disassociate with them. And I had a lot of people like that, where I didn't walk up and tell them, "Hey, I'm disassociating." I just stopped calling. I just stopped hanging out.
Right.
And if they did pursue me, I'd stop and I'd just say, "Look, I like you enough to tell you the truth. Like, I'm heading in a new direction. Whenever we get together, I'm thinking bad thoughts. I'm doing bad things. It's not going where I want to go. And so if you choose to change your direction, you want to get in touch, by all means, reach out to me. But I'm out of here." And the second group was limited association. Like, some of those people I really wanted to disassociate with were family members.
Right.
And
And
so I'm
that's
like,
not easy. And that's not an easy thing.
no.
Well, I
And
can
he said,
imagine.
so I had to sit down and tell a couple people, "Look, I'll see you at Christmas, Thanksgiving, maybe, but I really don't want to hang out with you. Every time I talk to you, I feel bad, or I'm sorry that you are not more positive and not going where I want to go. If you change your mind and you want to do something different, we'll talk about it. But I'll see you at Christmas." And then the third area was expanded association. Go find people that you admire, that have qualities that you want to develop, and take them to lunch and tell them that.
Right.
You'd be surprised how easy it is for successful people to take a little time and talk to you, because you tell them what you recognize in them. And the reason why you recognize those qualities in them is because you have them inside yourself. Why else would you recognize them?
But is it fair to say that when you kind of want to cut off some, like you said, negative people, it's kind of probably for a similar reason. You see they awaken some negative things in you that you don't want to awaken. You want to kind of destroy, you want to eliminate. So by the same token, it's so much more powerful to have those positive people awaken positive things in you. But I think I want to say that, in my opinion, that's just one technique that people probably have to work on. It's the most difficult thing to do, is cut off the negative influences in your life. I think it's so difficult. How do you think people can? It's just a matter of actually deciding to do it and then doing it, right? In other words, it's the hardest thing to do.
It is, but you know what's at stake is your life.
Yeah.
You need to take charge of your life, and I never even had 1 ounce of joy until I was 53. I'm 61 now. I had some satisfaction, but I didn't know I was that bad. I just didn't. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I was numb. I just didn't understand what that was about. But the negative people that I was hanging out with, they were reinforcing a negative narrative,
Right.
and and many times it came with negative habits. When they said, "Hey, let's get together and go have sushi," that really meant let's go drink a bunch of beer and sake, and let's numb out, right? And
Right.
for me, when I was a kid, I smoked a lot of pot because I didn't like who I was at all, and I was in an environment that I couldn't change. It was violent inside my house. It was violent outside my house, and I was constantly terrorized. So I would smoke pot, and it would immediately sever my consciousness, and I would go numb. And at least I wasn't feeling the terror, and but I would get paranoid eventually. So it was two sides of the same coin. And I smoked pot most of my adult life. I mean, not very much in the military, but I was constantly using it to self-medicate. And then I was never an alcoholic, but I abused alcohol and pot, um, because I was escaping. I needed to be numb. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to experience life.
Right.
And then, like when I was 53, I did some pretty extreme, like Native American ceremonies. Like I did a vision quest for 4 days and 4 nights without any food or water or talking or journaling or writing, just sitting alone in the wilderness up in the Canadian Rockies, and
Amazing.
my mind got so crystal clear, and I was able to see and understand so much about myself that was a that was a, it was a that changed the trajectory. And then I discovered plant medicines. I did a bunch of ayahuasca journeys, and I did a bunch of other types of plant medicines to really help me get underneath all of my pain and my thinking mind, and open up my awareness. And I found joy for the first time.
Hey, John, but that's different, right? In other words, in the beginning, when you described in the Army and the Marines, that was to become numb. That was to really shut down the reality and say, you know what, I just want to unplug. I don't want to exist the way I am, but I don't know what else to do. Now, when you're talking about in your 50s, that's a question of self-discovery. So ayahuasca and all the different, um, remedies and different methods were in this case to discover something within yourself. In other words, it wasn't that you were trying to shut down anymore. On the contrary, you wanted to see how you can open up some other channels. So I think it's a question of the purpose, a question of the intent and what you're trying to accomplish with this. So I think it's the most dangerous thing in the world when people just simply self-medicate to pass out. If you think about it, right? Because I think they're not learning the techniques, they're not learning the ways to deal with the actual problem and change. They just want to pass out and hope to stay passed out. Now, that's actually obviously a horrible thing. Now, it's so interesting that the question of self-discovery leads you to deeper and deeper and deeper,
Right.
learning about yourself as you did, as you said in your, um, you know, um, the 4 days and nights that you spent there, which must have been an interesting experience to say the least. I can only imagine. But how many times have you done several times like that, or was that the only time?
I did a lot of Indian sweat lodges. Like in the United States, they call um, the Canadian tribes are called First Nations, and in the United States, they call them Native American.
Okay.
So the Native American and First Nation ceremonies were really, really, really the most healing for me, more so than psychology and talking about things. They were really
Right.
just profound experiences. And what I found with the plant medicine journeys is that I was able to find a place that was not just the absence of conflict or trauma, but that not even the possibility of it. And that was something I did not expect. And so I was able to find this part of me that was no longer, that didn't understand suffering. There was no suffering. And so I was able to tether myself there and be there. And so it really was very, very cathartic. It was a real experience that I could bring back to my life.
Right.
And I started living from that perspective. There's nothing wrong with me. Bad things happen to me, which is, again, another great book, like an audiobook from Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry called What Happened to You. It totally takes a different track than there's something wrong with me. No, what happened to you is the question.
Correct.
So I was able to find this joy, and it was like my joy was guarded like one of those Russian dolls of different layers, right? I kept digging in and getting down to this next layer, only to find another hard, crusty layer, right? But with this work, the more I did it, the more I was able to go deeply into finding my joy, and that changed everything, because then I started attracting different things into my life. I was able to find the right relationship. I was able to get married. I was able to kind of leave a lot of the fear and the suffering behind, to where it diminishes. It still comes back, but it's like very, very, very briefly, and then it calms down.
Right.
So it never truly goes away, but I suffer very, very a small amount periodically, instead of living in suffering.
I got you. Right. Well, you're in control of it. It does not control you. You control it. Whatever that negative remainders of negativity that are still there, like you said, they never go away 100%, but you can control them. You can use them to kind of like fuel your continued self-discovery. It's interesting, a quote by Viktor Frankl that I was able to find, and I just really, I think it really rings true, that when a person cannot find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. In other words, I think it's all about meaning. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've he certainly, if you think about what he meant from this perspective, he certainly, what, as you said, Viktor Frankl went through some of the most insane moments imaginable to a human being, but he had a meaning, he had a purpose, he found meaning in what's going on. If he found it during those insane moments, I think all of us can find it in our lives. It's just a matter of searching. It's just a matter of searching and being relentless, right? Because one word you always use is relentless, because it's easy to give up, right? It's easy to say, well, I tried. Sometimes it's not a simple like this, and boom, I got it. All right, cool. I read this page, I read this book. No, you got to go on a journey. You got to go on a journey. And for you, the journey might be entirely different than it is for the next person. Maybe for that person, it may be a whole different discovery, but there is something to find. In other words, there's something in each one of us that requires a search, requires further work.
Well, if there was a nugget that I would leave with you that has also really made a huge difference, is there's a guy named Dick Schwartz who developed family systems, and really it's about parts work. And when I realized that I'm not depressed, there's a part of me that's depressed, but the bigger whole is not depressed. Like, I have moments where I feel depressed. I have moments when I'm triggered and I have rage, or I have whatever it is, but it doesn't represent who I am. It represents an unresolved part of me that situationally comes out. And when you can learn to think in relationship to, this part doesn't represent who I am, it represents part of me that needs some work.
Right.
You can be a lot more forgiving with yourself, because you've come a long way. You've grown, you've learned, you survived.
Exactly.
Okay. You're no longer a victim. You can take charge of your life, and realize that, man, part of me still hurts.
Right.
But I have a life, I have a profession, I have children, I have a life, right? But
purpose.
there are a purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you're not always in this part, but when you focus on I'm depressed and you
that's
take it
it.
on like that's all there is, you're not always depressed.
No,
Like when you're with your care dog, right? Or when you're with your kittens or whatever, there's
sure.
something that brings you out of that momentarily and you're not depressed.
But it's what you look at, what you focus on, and I oftentimes tell people that focus on anxiety, people that focus on the negative stuff. I think it's very, very similar to skiing down a slope, and there's a forest, a bunch of trees in front of you, and there's a path through the trees. If you focus on the forest, if you focus on the trees, you'll absolutely crash into them. But if you focus on the path around the trees, if you just look at the path, you won't even see the trees. You'll see the way through, and you just focus on the positive. Focus on what, but they gotta look for that path. You can pretend that it's not there, but you gotta look for it. I think the biggest point of a lot of the stuff that you worked on is to keep looking. In other words, you want to encourage, in my opinion, tell me if I'm wrong, you want to encourage people to keep looking within themselves, to keep looking for that improvement, for that progress. Be relentless and always keep searching for the better yourself, to better yourself and for the better version of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key.
Well, I know you have a lot of passion for working with the vets, as I do. And the most important thing that I have discovered for myself, that my son discovered, and thousands of others that I worked with over the years, it's a big part of my work, is understanding that the military gives you identity, mission, meaning, and purpose clearly. They
Right.
galvanizing you into something greater than yourself. You're part of something greater than yourself, and you have an identity you can wear on your sleeve and on your collar. You have a daily mission, and you have meaning and purpose, serving your country, protecting the people alongside you. I mean, it's a really incredible honor bound
Sure.
purpose, right?
Yes. Of
And so,
course.
but when you get out of the military, they outprocess you, and they don't tell you have to reinvent yourself. They don't tell you, hey, you're gonna have to reinvent this all over again. And so the biggest challenge that I see with a lot of vets is that they can't fill up the void that they're missing with drugs or alcohol or sex or porn or workaholism or adrenaline seeking or violence.
Yeah.
And when they realize that they have to reinvent themselves, I went through this with my son when he got out home from the military. He needed to get a new identity. Well, that was to
Yeah.
become a student. He needed a new mission. Well, that was to be getting in possession of all the facts that he needed to become a student, to use his military benefits.
Right.
And then what gave him meaning and purpose was to focus on, when he graduated, becoming a mental health counselor for veterans.
Yeah.
And so after he got provisioned with a new sense of direction, a new sense of mission, and what he envisioned doing, he started moving aggressively towards that objective. That's what
Of course.
veterans need. They need objectives.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to realize that you've lost your way. And if you got out of the military and you turned your life into a career to avoid whatever bad experiences you've had, and now you're retiring, maybe identity, mission, meaning, and purpose wasn't your issue. But now that you're retiring, a lot of times the bad things come back because you have more time. And so what I work on with people is probably the most galvanizing time of their life was when they were in the military and they knew who they were and they had some paramount moments. So we use that model of identity, mission, meaning, and purpose to come back to coherence, to come back to center.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that's a piece of advice that I was able to create for myself, that my son and I benefited from. It's a big part of my books. It's about reinvention and about
Absolutely.
repurposing your life.
Continuously, I would say, because I don't think that's a closed down process. That's something you got to continuously do and keep doing. I think
Well,
it's always.
there's a book called Transitions by William Bridges. It's just yet this is another little nugget, a little piece of bread on the crumb trail. He says it really well. We're either our whole life we're either preparing for, going through, or coming out of transition.
Right. Right.
You got to
Right.
let go so you can be in this purgatory to where you can experiencing something new, and you're constantly going through it. So you're not alone. There's plenty of resources out there,
Right.
you know, that you can pick up. And William Bridges, just one more person
Sure.
with transitions where you could actually, without anybody knowing it,
Yeah.
you can start learning about like who you're becoming and what you're up against.
Yeah, and recognizing that it just takes change. There's nothing wrong with change as long as it's progressive. You want to, nothing happens without some sort of, transformational pain, let's call it. In other words, it's never easy to change, but as long as it's for the better, as long as it's something you want to do progressively and to better yourself, it's impossible without a change, and that's a good thing. That's always a good thing. Hey, John, I feel bad from one perspective. I've taken so much of your time. I know you do a lot of podcasts. I know you do a lot of speaking engagements, and you talk to a lot of people about your book, about your work, all your books, but about your work in general. I appreciate you even sharing these thoughts with me. I truly, truly appreciate your time. And I know you're going to continue working. You think we could do this again in terms of, because I think your thoughts, when you kind of verbalize it, when you speak about these concepts, I think we may never know, but it probably helps so many countless people that are going to watch this and learn things from this video and from your book.
Well, I think it's just paying it forward. I mean, I was fortunate enough to bump into people that changed my life, you know, and I take great responsibility in what was given to me, and I think you do too. And you
Oh
know,
yeah,
it's wonderful if somebody can learn one little thing. Not that I'm a teacher, but I'm a messenger.
absolutely.
I'm not
Listen,
here to teach anything. I'm in this work. Like every day I get up, I get triggered and I got to self-regulate. You're never inoculated. You're never truly free. At least
right.
I don't think I ever will be, because I'm a human being. I'm a flawed human being, but I'm okay. I'm good. And I just would hope that other people find the same place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, John, and we'll do this again soon, I'm sure. Thank you, sir.
Look forward to it.